It is October 11th, 2024, and after Biden and Harris apparently held calls with Netanyahu this week, you got reports coming out saying that they are getting closer to a consensus on plans for an attack on Iran. Now, we have to remember, although Israel claims that they're just responding to Iran's last attack was retaliation for a string of assassinations and massacres carried out by Israel. Iran has also warned Israel against responding on their end, saying that the attacks would just continue to escalate. But it seems as though that escalation is exactly what Netanyahu wants. So where could all of this go? Are we headed for World War III with the US going up against Iran in the Middle East? While at the same time, the US is getting perilously close to World War III with Russia over in Europe as they refuse to de-escalate in their ongoing proxy war in Ukraine. So where are we headed on all fronts? Well, we got into all of the latest there with the special guest earlier. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Dan Kovalik, a human rights and labor rights lawyer, professor, and author of the book, The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters and Why You Should Care. Dan, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you, Rachel. Always a pleasure.
Always good to have you on the show. Now, I'm glad I get to talk to you about the latest because I know that there's a lot going on in the world right now, but also in the Middle East. And particularly right now, as we have reports noting that American journalist Jeremy Lafredo was arrested by the Israeli military this week. And according to reports, he's facing charges of aiding the enemy during wartime and providing information to the enemy. This is after he released a report on Iranian missile strikes in Israel, information that the Israeli military was actively trying to censor. And yet, the US government hasn't said a word about this, right? It's not even like they're like, oh no, we're looking into this. No, the State Department has nothing to say. Matt Miller has no crocodile tears to shed over this American journalist who has been assaulted and is being held in custody. What is your reaction to this case?
I find it absolutely horrifying. I mean, I was in the West Bank in December, so less than a year ago, and that could have been me. And I think he was captured in the West Bank, if I'm not mistaken. He will be, I fear he'll be treated very badly. The Israeli the prison authorities have gotten very much more aggressive since October 7th. Are known to starve people, beat them, rape them. So I fear for his safety. I fear for his life. And I am very angry that the United States appears to be nothing to protect him. With one phone call, they could get him released, is the truth of it. And I don't see that happening, at least not at the moment.
Yeah, and I know that is part of the main concern here when you look at the Biden administration and you go, okay, you act like you have no leverage over Israel whatsoever. Like there's nothing you can do. We just have to send them, over $20 billion the U.S. has sent Israel in military aid in the last year. They act as if they're beholden to do that. But then when it comes to any sort of leverage over Israel, you've got the State Department saying, oh, well, Israel is a sovereign country, right? Let's forget about how much money we send them. Let's just look at the fact that they make their own decisions and the U.S. has no influence. That's not the case at all. And that's also not how the U.S. treats every other country in the world, right? Every other nation, if they want something to happen, if they are not happy with the way that things are being run, the U.S. tries to interfere. So why do you think that it is that they act as though there's this double standard when it comes to Israel? Is it because Washington approves of everything that they're doing and they're just trying not to say that?
I do think that's the case. I think if they disapproved, it wouldn't be happening. And there have been famous cases of that. Dwight D. Eisenhower was able to push back against Israel successfully in the Suez Canal crisis in 1956. Ronald Reagan was able to get Menachem Begin, who himself was a very radical right-wing extremist when he was prime minister, to got him to back off killing civilians in Lebanon with just a phone call. So we know that the U.S. has incredible leverage over Israel, especially right now because Israel's economy is in shambles, okay? They need the influx of cash they're getting from the United States just to keep their economy going. They're also always running out of ammunition and weapons, and the U.S. has been replenishing those at an average of every 16 hours. So again, the U.S. has them over the barrel. If they just said, hey, no more cash or weapons for you, Israel would stop. But they're not doing that. And again, the only conclusion to draw from that is they approve of everything Israel's doing. But at the same time, they pretend they don't like it because they know their base, their Democratic base, their voters who they need to come to the polls in November don't like what's happening. So they need to pretend they don't like it either, but they're just pretending.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I know that with the, new Kamala Harris campaign, right after you had the coup ousting Biden from being the nominee of his own party after they initially forced him into that spot. Then you have Harris. She kind of acted like for a minute, right, that she cared about the Palestinians, that she was concerned about the war, that it needed to end. And then it almost seems like a switch flipped. And now when you look at the interviews that she does, she goes, oh, but October 7th, right? But we have to support Israel. They have to defend themselves. And it's like, I feel like she's almost completely forgotten about the Palestinians and even paying lip service to them. Why do you think that is? Is it because the Democrats don't feel like they have to, right? They acknowledge, yes, there is a segment of our party that genuinely cares about the Palestinians, that is watching a genocide unfold before our eyes. But then when it comes to that voter outreach, they're like, we're fine without them.
I don't think they feel fine without them. I think they know they could lose the election over this because they could lose states like Michigan over it that have big Arab populations. But they're willing to risk that. They're willing to risk losing in order to pursue their policy in Israel that they feel is so important. That overrides everything. And that is a scary thing. And even to the extent that, again, we have billions of dollars for Israel, billions of dollars for Ukraine, and yet it seems like we run out of money when people in the South need hurricane relief, for example. Then all of a sudden we cry poverty, or our government cries poverty. And again, you would think during, with less than a month ago, that they would be getting out the paycheck, right? Writing checks big time for those people in North Carolina, in Florida, in Georgia, who've suffered so much from these hurricanes, and yet they're not. Again, the priority is supporting these proxy states abroad and not supporting our own people.
Yeah, it's almost kind of shocking when you look at the devastation. I know from Hurricane Helene over the last couple of weeks, we've been keeping an eye on Hurricane Milton. It doesn't seem like the devastation was as bad, at least as was kind of predicted and warned about. So there's that. But I mean, when you think about Hurricane Helene, especially the fact that over 200 Americans have been killed, and yet the Biden administration is handing out checks to Ukraine and handing out checks to Israel. And it's like, I'm with you. It's less than a month before the election, and they don't even seem to really care, right? They're like, these are our priorities. We're sticking to it. And in addition to just supporting Israel, in addition to enabling a genocide in the Gaza Strip, now you've watched things expand over the last several weeks as you now have Israel targeting Lebanon. We saw the Iranian response, their retaliation that was carried out recently. And now Israel, even though Iran was retaliating to Israel's acts of aggressions, their assassinations, their massacres, now Israel is acting like it needs to retaliate on its end. I know that Biden and Netanyahu spoke over the phone this week, and you've got reports saying that they moved closer to an understanding on Israel's plans to attack Iran, with the U.S. accepting that Israel is going to launch a major attack on Iran soon, but still expressing concerns that striking certain types of targets could dramatically escalate things. How do you see this back and forth and how Biden is handling Netanyahu and apparently what he's planning right now?
Well, again, when it comes to Joe Biden, we have to ask ourselves, does he even have the mental capacity to really be dealing with Netanyahu? I mean, I guess I trust if they claim that they're talking, but what does Biden understand, and what is he able to even express to Netanyahu. It appears to me that the neocons, like Anthony Blinken, have totally taken over the Middle East policy of the United States. They're the ones in command. And we've seen some incredible things about what Blinken's been doing. We saw that in April, he lied to Congress about Israel's blocking of humanitarian aid. He was told by two agencies that they were blocking aid, yet then he told Congress they weren't in order to continue funding going. And now it's just come out that he apparently greenlit Israel's right to attack humanitarian convoys if they believed Hamas had anything to do with those convoys. So he has a total malign influence over Middle East policy, but he appears to be the one in control. I don't think, in truth, Biden's in control of anything. I mean, that's what it appears to be the case. And so, again, the policy's been ceded to these right-wing neocons, and that's quite frightening to me.
Oh, absolutely. And on top of that, I mean, we didn't vote for Antony Blinken, right? We did not vote for him as the president of the United States. And for people like him and Lloyd Austin and Jake Sullivan and others within the Biden administration to be kind of taking the reins on his policies, because I agree with you. I don't think that Biden is making any decisions right now, even if it's what he's eating for breakfast, right? I think that he is so incapacitated at this point that they're literally just like dragging him around, telling him where to go, and hey, at least he can read a teleprompter. And when you have a situation like that, we know that Israel wants war with Iran. We know that Israel wants to drag the US into war with Iran. And you've got Iran in this position where it has been very patient and very methodical in each of its responses. Now it's warning that, hey, if Israel attacks Iran, that they are going to respond and that the situation is going to continue to escalate. So what are your concerns about a full-blown war leading to World War III eventually taking part in the region?
I think we're on the verge of that. I think we're very close to it. I mean, in some ways, that regional war has already started. It's not full-blown yet, I think, but I think we're one attack away from that. If Israel has a major attack on Iran, Iran's made it clear they're going to return with a major attack of the kind they've never launched before against Israel. And I think that's it. Then you have your full-blown war right there. So that's very frightening because, of course, Israel, as we know, has nuclear weapons, even though they've never declared them, which, of course, is illegal. But nonetheless, they have them. So the use of nuclear weapons, I think, is a real possibility. Actually, some have already suspected that they might have used a tactical nuclear weapon already in Lebanon. That's not confirmed, but there's some, at least, indication that that could have happened already. So it's a very frightening situation. It's the type of situation that most, if not all, U.S. presidents, as bad as they've been, have tried to prevent. They have not wanted that sort of conflagration. But again, we don't have an elected president in charge to say no at this point, is my view. And everyone should be afraid of that. And I think, what I just said about the Middle East equally applies to Ukraine, that a war with Russia via Ukraine could also be very much in the offing soon. And again, there's no president sitting in the Oval Office who has the ability to say no to that. And everyone should be frightened. And honestly, Rachel, I'm shocked at how little the media talks about that. Even wonders out loud, who's in charge?
Mm-hmm.
And that is just seems to be a total abdication of the media's responsibilities.
Yeah, it was so weird to me when they, after years of acting like Joe Biden's fine, right? Don't worry about him. Everything's good. After that, when you had the debate between Biden and Trump, and then you had the media suddenly magically wake up and say, oh, well, Biden can't run for re-election, right? He needs to drop out. He needs to be removed. And yet they didn't then extend that conversation to, if he can't run for re-election, how can he continue in office, right? Why is he still in the White House? They conveniently kind of left that out. And as you're pointing it out there, I mean, I know that we've got Zelensky running all around Europe and the US saying, this is my victory plan. And it's essentially a NATO wish list and demands to further draw the West. I mean, he wants NATO membership, right? He wants the restrictions on long-range missiles to be removed. So basically, he's asking for NATO to get involved in this war with Russia for it to become World War III. He's demanding that on one end. On the other hand, as you were noting, you've got Netanyahu trying to provoke war with Iran. Well, Iran's not an isolated country. Russia isn't an isolated country. They happen to be friends with each other, along with China. I mean, does the US, and I guess this goes beyond Biden, right? Even to all of those neocons in Washington who are looking at how defense stocks are going to soar, do they not realize here that if we're talking about a World War III situation, the US does not have an advantage whatsoever here?
Well, it's very true. We know that Biden, at least when he was Copus Mentis, had been planning to spend $1 trillion to modernize the U.S.'s nuclear weapon stock over the next 20 years. I assume that plan is still in effect. So there are plans to modernize it. But as you say, at this point, I think everyone recognizes that Russia has more nuclear weapons than the U.S. does. I think the U.S., though, believes it might have the opportunity for a first strike against Russia. It should be remembered that in the 1960s, late 1960s, the Pentagon ran war games where they decided that they could win a nuclear war against the Soviet Union then at a loss of about 50% of the U.S. population, but they were willing to take that risk. I mean, the Pentagon, you should look this up. It's fascinating. And that those types of war games is what led to the movie being made, Dr. Strangelove, of course. And you still have people, I assume, in the halls of government and the Pentagon in Washington who are willing to take that risk. And again, you had presidents who at least said no to that. And again, you don't have a president now. So you have these ideologues who are willing to blow up the world, who seem to be in charge. And again, that should make everyone panic. And yet no one seems to care, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, it is really concerning, the just lack of care as we're, sitting here talking about being on the precipice of World War III on multiple different fronts, right? Not just one conflict in the world. No, we have more than one. And I thought it was interesting, bringing it back to the conversation about what Israel could do, how they could hit Iran. I know that there had been some ideas going around over the last week or so, kind of questions about, okay, would they actually target Iran's any sort of nuclear capabilities or nuclear sites there? And the New York Post actually published an op-ed by British commentator Douglas Murray with the title, Biden-Harris should help Israel take out Iran's nuclear program. The world will thank them. Now, I'm thinking about what comes after Biden, right? Or what comes after the current administration. We've got Harris and Trump running. You've got Trump in a position where he clearly has been anti-Iran. I mean, he hasn't been dumb enough to go to a war with Iran, but he assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. And so clearly Trump is not the brightest there when it comes to this conflict. But I'm wondering, would the Biden administration be willing to help Israel target Iran in such a way, knowing that there's a possibility of Trump coming in after? And could that then increase tensions even further? Because when you look at all these different scenarios, it just doesn't seem like there is any peaceful way out that the U.S. is actually going to take anytime soon. What are your concerns about the back and forth there, and how the Trump campaign seems to be viewing Iran? And I know that that's kind of been increased by these reports and claims that Iran is somehow trying to take out Trump.
Yeah, well, I think both the Biden administration and a potential Trump administration, or a potential Harris administration for that matter, are all dangerous. when it comes to Iran. You have Harris making very bellicose statements against Iran. You do have Trump, who openly said recently that Israel should take out Iran's nuclear sites. Also, there was a general who worked for Trump who said that he convinced Trump not to engage in a full-scale strike against Iran, that Trump had wanted to do that at one point, and he was convinced out of it. So we know that there are tendencies, I think, amongst all of our potential presidents to want to engage in a war with Iran. I think, again, there are, very powerful people in Washington who wanted that since 1979 and see a chance to do it now. And I do think actually the most dangerous time will be between the elections and inauguration in January. I do think the lame duck Biden administration will be very dangerous when it comes to all of these theaters we're talking to about the Middle East, Ukraine, and China as well. I think they will see they have nothing to lose at that point. So that I think that will be the most dangerous time, in my own view.
Yeah, and in a way, it's like, oh, January isn't that far away, but it can feel like a very long time between now and Inauguration Day, especially when you look at the current political situation we have. And I'm with you. I don't think Biden's in control, but I also don't trust a single person within his administration because they have helped to get us to this point. And when you look at the other options that could be coming in, it's like, yeah, definitely not looking good for the US or really for the world for that matter. Certainly a lot at stake here all around. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Dan Kovalik, a human rights and labor rights lawyer, professor, and author of the book, The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters and Why You Should Care. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Rachel, thank you.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you can also check out my new series, Sanctioned, which is exclusive for paid subscribers. There are new episodes out every week. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. And as always, thank you all so much for all of your support. I'll see you next time.